I'm Chance Storland, and in San Antonio, military means local. This is Military City, a new podcast from expressnews.com. San Antonio Express News senior reporter Sig Christensen was embedded with the 3rd Infantry Division during the U.S.-led invasion of Iraq in 2003 and has reported on military-related topics for decades. Each week, Sig and I will discuss the military stories important to San Antonio, both from today and the past. Sig, today is our 2nd episode for this new podcast, Military City, and today we're discussing the recent deployment of Texas Army National Guard troops to foreign soil. Now, they've been having ceremonies for these deployments for years now, and you attended their going away ceremony for this specific deployment earlier this week, correct?
I did, and I'll tell you that this is one of the oldest stories I do. This goes all the way back to the beginning of the war on terrorism, a month or so after 9/11, when Mark Sabani and I went up to Fort Hood. Mark Sabani was our intrepid photographer who was with me for the invasion of Iraq. And we went up there. We spent time with families as they were getting ready to leave, say goodbye to their soldiers. It was on a Friday night in particular when we went to one of those ceremonies, and it was really sad. The auditorium was full of people, families, kids, mothers, fathers, grandparents. And, it wasn't war yet, but it was getting real, and everyone knew it. Everyone knew that war was coming in Iraq. I think that there was a general sense of that. And First Cav was going to be one of the first to deploy divisions. We all knew that too. And so people were scared. People naturally have some trepidation about the unknown. And that's what happened yesterday. From then to now, these ceremonies have families, mothers, fathers, little kids, soldiers holding their babies. If you look at Jerry Lara's pictures in the story that ran this week, you'll see all of that. There's a lot of emotion in it. These soldiers from the Texas Army National Guard are going to the Horn of Africa, Djibouti, to be specific. And while it's a reasonably safe place, you never know. And that's where the suspense comes in.
I think it's really important, Sig, that you just mentioned the sad feeling that most likely surrounds any deployment ceremony, such as the one that we're talking about. I know specifically just as a consumer, but also working in news and radio broadcasting, whenever you have a deployment going away ceremony, it is more solemn and it's more or less sort of like a straight news report. These people are going this place for this time. When they come back, it's completely different. There's smiles. There's always young kids going to, hug a father or a mother, or even an aunt or an uncle. Everyone kind of goes. But you're right. At least from what I can tell, and you certainly have much more experience in this department, these are a much more sad occurrence because even if they are going to somewhere that might be declared more safe than another area, they are going away for quite some time.
In this case, they're going for 9 months. The guys that went with First Cav in 2001, I'm not really remembering exactly how long they were there. I think 6 months. And, I look back on that and think 6 months in the Kuwaiti desert doesn't sound bad, but let me tell you what that place looks like. It's a lot of sand. It's a never-ending beach. And you can be out there with your laptop computer on a little wooden desk, and in 10 minutes, the screen is full of dust. Sand and dust. It's blowing all the time. And then, at some point, the spring arrives and you begin to have shamals, terrible sandstorms. One person very neatly put it saying that a shamal was like a hurricane of sand. And I've been through a whole bunch of those miserable experiences. And I've covered lots of hurricanes. I'd take the hurricane to the shamal anytime. And so this is a pretty miserable place to be. And you may have heard the phrase in movies when they talk about life in the war zone being like Groundhog Day. Well, it is. There's no reason to remember what day of the week it is unless you're a reporter working on a Sunday story. You don't even need to mark the days off on the calendar. Every day is the same. And most of the time, there's no danger. But when we went to war, there was danger everywhere. There was no front. And you could die at any moment. It was a very surreal experience sometimes. But back here in the States, families are at home. They're wondering what's going on. And having been through this myself, as a parent, I will tell you that when my stepson went off to war for the second time, I worried like an old hen. And it really bothered me. I saw him off at Fort Lee, and I was just almost crippled with anxiety that first day. And, the ironic part of that is that that's the kid that I went to war with during the invasion of Iraq. That's the kid I was with every day.
Yeah, not to cut you off, Sig, but if you would like to hear an interesting story about how Sig Christensen, while reporting for the San Antonio Express News, was in a war zone with his own stepson, check out our inaugural episode of Military City. That's available on this feed. You can check out the podcast in Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, lots of different places. Just go to expressnews.com/podcast for a full listing. That was quite a surprise when you told me that a few weeks ago when we recorded that episode, Sig. But yeah, back to what you're saying. We're going to have a few clips here in a moment talking about this specific deployment. But why don't you kind of give us some general information? What's the idea behind this deployment? What's the mission for these troops?
Well, I think they're basically going to provide nation building and peacekeeping assistance. They're going to help people build businesses. They're going to talk to college students. They're going to spend time doing some kind of public work projects, more than likely, I would guess. They're not going to be doing combat operations. That's not what they're really there for. And generally speaking, there has not been a lot of danger for them to worry about. But with that said, here's what they will do every day they go outside of their base. They will be wearing their Kevlar, so they'll have their bulletproof vests on and they'll have their helmets on. Their weapons will be locked and probably loaded. They will be on a wartime footing, ready to fight the moment someone shoots at them. That's no different from Baghdad. It's no different from Kabul. It's no different from Forward Operating Base Ghazni, where I went off on patrols like that. I've seen a lot of that, and they will not take chances. One thing you better know about the Army, it's actually very safety conscious. There are a lot of rules. And in this case, they will not take chances. So they will go out and do good things for the people of Djibouti, but they'll also be ready to kill them if somebody tries to start a fight with them. And that's what they're supposed to do. That's what they're trained to do. And back home, when I stress this, and I do, families are going to wonder every day what's going on over there. They're going to watch the news. They're going to be nervous, and their imaginations on some days might run wild. It's pretty normal. And just imagine you have a son or a daughter in the Army, and they have deployed to Djibouti or to Iraq or to Afghanistan. You are going to worry about them a lot. And that's what a small segment of our society has been doing now for 17 years.
Now, Sig, I have never served in our nation's armed forces, but I do have several friends from my hometown where I grew up in the Midwest who have, gone to the different branches and also served in some sort of guard unit. And the difference, of course, being that when you're full-time active military, that's your job. And when you're guard, you have a separate job usually, and then you serve some weekends. At least that's, the case that I'm familiar with my friends. And then so when you get deployed, obviously your whole life gets flipped on its head, let alone your career and what you're doing. But if you have a family, like just imagine what that would do to somebody. So my question is, how much notice do these people get that they're going to be going to the Horn of Africa or they're going to be going somewhere else? Because these are Texas Army National Guard troops. I assume they're not full time. They're having families, at least some of them, and they're going to be working in other careers. And so what kind of preparation do they get, or at least what kind of time do they get to prepare for this transition to be outside of the country, outside of where they're living now?
Oh, well, their unit will get a warning order well in advance. They will train for quite a while, based out of their own headquarters, whatever they're doing their operations from. In this case, it's probably Camp Mabry in Austin. But these soldiers will have lots of time to prepare. There won't be anything sudden about it. The orders come down from the Pentagon. The units are picked for reasons that I really don't understand. These are infantry units, so they're principally out there trained to kill. There was a reason why they were selected to do that. And so these soldiers will get a lot of training. They go through certification processes, so they have to sit there in front of the computer and take tests. They then go to the field, and they're graded in the field. They get months and months and months of this training. And then they go to Fort Hood, which is where they're going to go later this week. And they will do some final training. They'll get some final evaluations prior to their deployment. And so they have a lot of time for that. But here is the rub. They are civilians. They have jobs. One of them, a Corporal Nussbaum, is a college-educated person who works at USAA in their cyber theft department. He's a guy who does some pretty serious, intelligent sleuth work, I would guess, to make sure that your bank account doesn't get hacked. And there are lots of guys like that. And most employers are very supportive of our troops. There is a law in place that basically ensures that they cannot lose their jobs while they're gone, simply because they get deployed. So the law protects them. Most of the time, employers are really good about taking care of their employees when they come back from service. But these are different from your typical average, everyday, full-time soldier. They actually have a different life. And what's interesting is they bring a lot of different skills to the table that you don't see with active duty troops. And there's no offense meant by this, but I was with soldiers from the Texas Guard who were doing an aviation mission, a medevac mission out of Balad in Iraq in 2008, and they replaced one of the large Army active duty divisions. I can't really remember which one now. I think 101st Airborne. And these guys come in, and one of them is a guy named Aaron Withrow, and he's a carpenter on the side. And this guy starts making life so much better for him and his fellow troops just because he can build things. And they were living better than the soldiers before them because Aaron Withrow really had a great civilian job. He knew how to build stuff. And there's a lot of that in the Guard, lots of talent that has nothing to do with making war or any of the other things that you do in the Army. So they bring a completely different look to the Army and to the mission.
That's an amazing story. I'm so glad you brought that up. I hadn't thought about the difference there between, some of my friends who are active military, and that's what they do day in and day out, and people who have, their careers, they put them on hold. As you mentioned, hopefully, according to the law, those careers are still waiting for them when they come back, but they can use those skills in war zones, anywhere that they're being deployed, whether or not it's in an active war zone or like the mission we're talking about now, going to the Horn of Africa, where you described it more as talking with people and nation building, but at the same time, at a moment's notice, be ready to kill if need be. That's such an interesting dichotomy, and it's so great that they're able to bring those skills. Sig, on this topic, I want to go now to our first clip. This is going to be talking about the effects that this does have on families and the soldiers who go off to serve as part of this deployment of Texas Army National Guard troops. This This is a spokesman for the National Guard Association of the United States by the name of John Goheen. Set this up for me. What are we going to hear from Mr. Goheen?
Well, John knows an awful lot about the Guard, and he's going to talk about how there is a drag factor here, that this is not an easy thing for families to deal with. Obviously, and he points this out in the story and in in the longer interview that I did. Soldiers with the Guard want to deploy. Lots of surveys seem to show that they want to deploy. That's why they joined the Guard. So they want to get out. They don't want to just train. But it has a really serious drag effect on the families. The families are going to lose their breadwinner and their and the guy who comes home and takes care of stuff that you kind of depend on him to do. Stuff like mowing the lawn. Well, now his wife is going to have to mow the lawn. And if the garbage disposal breaks, if he's handy with stuff like that, she's going to have to call a repairman instead. And then, of course, there's the larger intangible thing of you're worrying about them. And so John's going to talk about that. It's an old subject. And they've done better over the years at helping families feel centered, if you will, while these folks are gone. But it's still not easy.
Oh, I think if you talk to individual families, I don't think the families are incredibly excited about it. I mean, it's a long time, relatively long time. I mean, these missions used to be 18 months. Now they're 1 year leaving home and returning home. So it's only one grade at school. It's only one Little League season. It's only one anniversary. Makes it a little bit easier. These things are not easy on the family. But I think our families have learned a lot over the years. I'm sure you can find individual spouses that are like, as these missions approach, have a certain amount of trepidation. But our people, I think there's a fear among some commanders if the Guard doesn't deploy, we're going to lose a lot of good people because, they didn't join just to train. And this is a real difference from when I served back in the 1990s. I mean, people, to a large degree, if the nation needs them, they want to deploy. How long this is going to go, I mean, that's anybody's guess. But I think if you talk to guys in the units, I mean, there's a certain amount of sacrifice combined with excitement. A certain amount of concern and wonder. And it's an adventure tempered with the sacrifice of leaving families and small children in many cases. And also, one of the things that happens is you have a natural amount of attrition when units come home because when units come home, there's always this sentiment within a unit. Hey, okay, that's my last one. I've done 2 now, or I've done 3 now, but there's a certain camaraderie in people that are part of the unit. They want to go together, serve together, and then they'll come home and decide what their future is.
Sig, we have a few moments left, and we have another clip that we can get to here. This is going to be Command Sergeant Major Carl Tom Davis and his wife, Chief Warrant Officer 3 Sheila Davis, who will actually be making this deployment to the Horn of Africa together. Before we get to that clip and the things that they're going to discuss there, is that common? Are we sending couples to different parts of the world when we do these deployments?
It happens quite a bit. In that first story I wrote about first Cav soldiers deploying, we deployed, I think, the next week with a group of first Cav soldiers. We get to Kuwait, settle in, and the first thing I run into is a couple that is out there, both of them working in the desert. And I said, you got kids? And they said, yeah, but our parents take care of them. So every soldier has a family plan, a plan basically that ensures that if they both get deployed, that somebody is there to take care of their kids. If nobody can do that, they're probably going to be boarded out of the Army because the Army wants you to be able to deploy. And so it's not uncommon for dual service couples, as we call them, to deploy together. It's also not common. It's also common for dual married couples who might serve on the same base together or the same Army post together to later be separated because their job will take them to a different post, and they may live halfway across the country from each other and have to cope with that for 2 or 3 years. So it's like anywhere else. People meet, sometimes they fall in love, and then they're kind of bound not just by their job, but by their relationship, and it does create some complications. For the Army, there is no real complication. You need to be ready to go, and then they send you. In this case, the Davises are going to go. They're going to live together in the same quarters, which is something that didn't happen 15 or 17 years ago. And they're going to basically have their life just as they have. It will be a little bit different, but they're going to probably get along just fine, and they'll have each other there as support. A big key for them, their kids are grown, so they don't have to worry about anybody having to take care of them.
Excellent. So let's hear that final clip with Command Sergeant Major Carl Tom Davis and his wife, Chief Warrant Officer 3, Sheila Davis, who once again are making this deployment to the Horn of Africa. Together, we'll take a listen to that SIG and then come back for final thoughts.
So you've been there.
I have. I was what we call a PDSS, a pre-deployment site survey, and myself, Major Bargwin, and several other people went over, and we just get a lay for the land and meet with the battalion that's currently on ground there, and then meet with the different branches, the Navy, Air Force people.
Back here, do you think most people have any idea what we're doing in the Horn? Typical American?
I would say the majority probably not, but there's more information on a daily basis that is all over the web. I would say that a deploying soldier's family probably becomes aware. So the battalion that's there now is from Texas. I'm pretty confident that the majority of the families of those soldiers started doing research just as our soldiers and their families have done.
That's what the last family told me, in fact. She got on the Jennifer Nussbaum. She said that they would, when she would think about where he might go, she got on the net and started looking at every place that he could possibly go, and then rate the threats so she could figure out how much she should really worry.
Right.
And with you having more than 500 soldiers going, do you have some idea of how many families you've got?
So we planned this deployment ceremony to have in excess of 1,500 in attendance, if that says anything.
We have families, though. We have one family that I know of from Utah. So
there's families.
Yeah, there's families all over, not just in Texas.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it looked like you might have had 1,500 people here. Everything was taken.
And lots of standings.
That looks like a good estimate to me. I thought hundreds for sure. And then you have more families than that who didn't make it.
Yes,
How worried do you think they are about this? Well, you described it to me, and either of you can answer it. I mean, there's a worry factor. You never get rid of it. But at the same time, you're living in a really nice base, and the threat level is described being lower than Iraq was in 2008. And Iraq in 2008 was pretty safe.
But when I was, the difference between 2004 and 2009 in Iraq was night and day. The only thing that I always temper is, regardless of the fact that it is currently a calm environment, that I impress upon the soldiers to impress upon their families that anything is possible.
So back here now with Sig Christensen talking about this deployment by Texas Army National Guard troops to foreign soil to the Horn of Africa. Final thoughts, Sig? Anything we haven't covered yet that you'd like to discuss, or perhaps a final discussion on something before we end the podcast for today?
Yeah, thank you. One thought here, most of you out there who listen to this podcast and most of the people in this country have no connection with the military. You probably don't even know people in the military. This is a small group of people, only a few million people in uniform, and they're deploying at a fairly fast tempo. They're going to places that our national security strategy has deemed important for whatever reason. And frankly, when you're talking about sending people to Iraq, Afghanistan, and Djibouti, and the Philippines, or some other place, that's the face of forever war that you're looking at if you're looking at my story and those soldiers in formation and those soldiers holding their babies and holding their wives and holding their mothers. That's the forever war. It's been going on 17 years, and it'll probably go on for 17 more. And here's a thought or two about that. The first thing is, we wonder, those of us who cover the military or who study it, wonder if this would be tolerated if the United States had a draft. If folks out there had to lose their kids involuntarily to the military, how much would the people of the United States tolerate? Right now, it's pretty clear that they tolerate this because it's not their kids going to war. That's kind of a blunt thing to say, but it's also true. And the widening gap between the public and the military, and there's no question that it's getting bigger, is probably not helping anything. There's no skin in the game. So I'll tell you about one couple in here, the Nussbaums. And one of the things that happens is that when Corporal Jonathan Nussbaum thinks he's going to be going to Africa, his wife, rather interestingly, decided that she'd better get on the internet and learn about what this place was that he might be going to. And so what she does is she finds out about the Horn of Africa, and she said, I Googled every place he could be sent to gauge how worried I needed to be. Djibouti winds up being a 7 on a scale of 1 to 10. That would be 10 as the most dangerous and 1 as the least. And this is what ultimately Andrew Bacevich, who lost a son in Iraq and served as a cavalry commander in Vietnam, this is what he said. And I guess I'll leave you with this thought. I imagine Texans are proud of their own state troops, but I would be curious to know how the average man on the street describes the purpose of the mission. Spreading freedom and democracy, keeping America safe. Do they even know? And that's the question I'll leave for folks listening to the podcast to answer. Do you know what our troops are doing out there? Do you know why they are there? And what else do you really know about the policy that has tens of thousands of soldiers deploying to places that we've been to a long time? And where's that policy going? Is that policy working? Or are we simply going in circles? And in the end, this is really serious stuff because we're losing soldiers out there. Not as many as we used to, but this is not a pain-free business. And when you go to a funeral, with full military honors for a soldier who has been killed, you see just how horrible it is. So this is real world stuff. And what happened this week at Fort Sam Houston was a reminder that the war is droning on. And it's not an easy thing to watch some days because these people are hurting inside. They have to trust that what we're doing is the right thing and they're following their orders, but they're all still hurting.
I think that's an excellent question to end on, Sig. And while it would be very long, that's the type of statement we could put almost in the description of this podcast, Military City. I think that's what we're trying to do every week, is to try to get to those answers. Not that we'll find them, but to try to move towards answers to that question that you've just posed. So, Sig, great to speak with you. We'll have another episode of Military City in about another 2 weeks. Have a good rest of your time until we speak again.
Thank you, Chance.